Blackwells Decision. Lost in a snowstorm, Lady Beatrice of Blackmere sought shelter in Sir Geoffrey de Moray's fortress, a place whispered of in fearful legend. He stood before her, arms crossed, studying her with a careful gaze. "You should not be here, my lady," he murmured. "And yet here you stand." Chapter 1. The Tempest's Embrace. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at Beatrice's cloak as she urged her exhausted mare onward. Snow, thick and blinding, swirled around them, erasing the already faint track through the blackwood. Each gust threatened to rip her from the saddle, the icy fingers of the storm reaching into her very bones. Fear, cold and sharp, gnawed at her. She had been a fool to attempt this journey alone, a fool to believe she could outrun the shadows that pursued her. Blackmere, her ancestral home, had become a cage, its familiar stone walls closing in on her. Her brother, Baron Alaric, driven by ambition and a thirst for power she could not comprehend, had arranged a betrothal. Lord Elric of the North March, a man twice her age and with a reputation as cold and cruel as the winter winds, was to be her husband. A pawn in Alaric's game of alliances, she was to be traded for land and influence. But Beatrice, though raised to obey, possessed a spirit that would not be so easily tamed. She had fled, hoping to reach her aunt, the abbess of St. Martha's, a sanctuary where even Alaric's reach might falter. Now, lost and freezing, that hope was dwindling with each fading hour of daylight. The mare stumbled, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Beatrice dismounted, her legs numb and unsteady. She stroked the horse's neck, whispering words of comfort she barely felt herself. "Just a little further, Alara," she murmured, though she knew not where further lay. The trees, skeletal and cloaked in white, offered no guidance, only a mocking echo of the wind's mournful cry. A sudden, sharp crack split the air. Alara reared, her eyes wide with terror. Beatrice struggled to hold the reins, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Another crack, closer this time. The ground beneath them trembled. Then, with a groan that seemed to shake the very earth, a massive oak, ancient and burdened with snow, crashed down just yards away, blocking the path she had been following. Despair, black and suffocating, threatened to overwhelm her. She was trapped. The storm, the fallen tree, the relentless cold. It was all too much. She sank to her knees in the snow, the fight draining out of her. Tears, hot and stinging, froze on her cheeks. Was this to be her end? Alone, forgotten, swallowed by the unforgiving wilderness? Then, through the swirling snow, she saw it. A flicker of light, faint and distant, but undeniably there. Hope, fragile as a newborn bird, stirred within her. She pushed herself to her feet, pulling Alara with her. "Come," she urged, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. There might be shelter. The light led her through a narrow gap in the trees, onto a winding path that seemed to climb endlessly upwards. The wind, though still fierce, was somewhat muted here, the trees acting as a partial shield. As she rounded a bend, the source of the light became clear. It was a fortress, a massive structure of dark, imposing stone that seemed to grow out of the very mountainside. Towers, capped with snow, pierced the swirling white, their silhouettes stark against the gathering dusk. Torches, burning in sconces along the walls, cast an eerie, flickering glow. It was a place of forbidding beauty, a haven of last resort. But it was also a place of legend, a place whispered about in hushed tones around the fires of Blackmere. Moray, the fortress of Sir Geoffrey de Moray, the Winter Lord. A man shrouded in mystery and rumor, a warrior said to be as cold and ruthless as the mountains he called home. Stories spoke of battles fought and won with brutal efficiency, of a past stained with blood and loss, of a heart turned to ice. Beatrice had heard the tales, had dismissed them as the fanciful imaginings of frightened villagers. Now, facing the storm and the very real prospect of death, those tales took on a new, chilling significance. She hesitated at the massive, iron-bound gate, her hand hovering over the heavy knocker. Fear warred with desperation. Was she trading one danger for another? Was the sanctuary of Moray worth the price of facing the Winter Lord himself? Alara nudged her, her warm breath a small comfort against the biting cold. The decision was made for her. Beatrice lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed through the courtyard, swallowed by the storm, yet somehow she knew, heard. The weight felt endless. The wind continued to tear at her. The snow seeped into her boots, chilling her feet to the bone. Just as she began to think she had been mistaken, that the fortress was abandoned, the gate creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted in the entrance, tall and imposing, clad in dark furs and leather. He held a lantern aloft, its light casting long, dancing shadows on the snow-covered courtyard. He did not speak, merely observed her with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness, assessing, judging. Beatrice straightened her shoulders, summoning the last vestiges of her courage. She was Lady Beatrice of Blackmere, and she would not cower, not even before the legendary Winter Lord. "I seek shelter from the storm," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I have lost my way." The figure remained silent for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Then, he lowered the lantern slightly, the light illuminating his face. It was a face carved from granite, harsh and unyielding, framed by dark hair streaked with silver. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a depth of weariness that belied his formidable presence. It was a face that had seen too much, felt too much, and yet there was a flicker of something else there, something that hinted at a vulnerability carefully hidden. He stepped aside, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the fortress. "You should not be here, my lady," he murmured. "And yet here you stand." He gestured for her to enter, his movements deliberate and controlled. Beatrice hesitated, then, taking a deep breath, led Alara through the gate and into the shadow of Moray. The heavy gate closed behind her with a resounding clang, sealing her fate. The storm raged outside, but within the walls of the fortress, a different kind of tempest was about to begin. A tempest born of fear, of hope, and of the unexpected encounter between a runaway lady and the enigmatic lord who held her destiny in his hands. Chapter 2. Sanctuary of Shadows. The courtyard was vast, a silent expanse of snow broken only by the flickering shadows cast by the torches. The air, though sheltered from the worst of the wind, was still bitterly cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something else, a metallic tang that Beatrice couldn't quite place. It reminded her of the blacksmith's forge at Blackmere, but sharper, more intense. Sir Geoffrey de Moray led her towards a smaller door set into the massive stone wall, his silence adding to the unsettling atmosphere. He moved with a grace that belied his size, his steps almost soundless on the snow-covered ground. Beatrice, following close behind, felt a prickle of unease. This was a place of power, a place where secrets were kept and dangers lurked. The door opened into a dimly lit stable, the air warmer here, filled with the scent of hay and horses. Several stalls were occupied, the animals shifting restlessly, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. A stable boy, young and wide-eyed, hurried forward, bowing low to Sir Geoffrey. "Take the lady's mare," the Winter Lord instructed, his voice devoid of warmth. "See that she is well cared for." The boy, without a word, took Alara's reins and led her to an empty stall. Beatrice watched them go, feeling a pang of guilt for bringing the animal into this unsettling place. She turned back to Sir Geoffrey, who was watching her with that same unnerving scrutiny. "You will be shown to a chamber," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the stable. "Food and dry clothes will be provided. You are fortunate, Lady Beatrice, that I found you before the storm claimed you." "I am grateful for your hospitality, Sir Geoffrey," Beatrice replied, keeping her voice even despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. She met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "Though I confess, I am surprised. Moray is not known for its welcoming nature." A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, crossed his features. "Moray is a fortress, my lady, not a guest house. We are not accustomed to receiving unexpected visitors. He turned and led her out of the stable, across a smaller, enclosed courtyard, and into the main keep. The entrance hall was immense, its high, vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, a roaring fire casting a warm, orange glow that contrasted sharply with the cold stone. Tapestries, depicting scenes of battles and hunts, adorned the walls, their colors faded with age. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and beeswax. 2 men-at-arms, clad in chainmail and bearing the moray crest a snarling wolf's head on a field of black, stood guard at the foot of a wide, curving staircase. They snapped to attention as Sir Geoffrey approached, their eyes following Beatrice with undisguised curiosity. "This is Lady Beatrice of Blackmere," Sir Geoffrey announced, his voice echoing in the hall. "She is our guest. See that she is treated with the respect due her station." The men-at-arms bowed, their expressions unreadable. Beatrice felt a surge of relief at his words. At least she would not be treated as a prisoner, though the unspoken question of why she was being granted such courtesy hung heavy in the air. A woman, older, with a stern face and a neatly braided gray hair, appeared at the top of the stairs. She wore a simple, dark gown, a silver chain with a large key hanging at her waist. This, Beatrice guessed, was the housekeeper, the one who held sway over the domestic affairs of Moray. "Alara," Sir Geoffrey addressed her, using the same name as her horse, causing a slight pause in Beatrice's thoughts before she continued to mentally follow. "This is Lady Beatrice. See that she is given the chamber next to the solar, and prepare a bath. She is chilled to the bone." Alara, the housekeeper, descended the stairs, her eyes assessing Beatrice with a critical gaze. "My lord," she acknowledged, her voice crisp and efficient. She turned to Beatrice. "Follow me, my lady." The chamber was small but comfortable, a welcome change from the biting cold outside. A fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the stone walls. A simple wooden bed, covered with thick furs, stood against one wall. A chest, a washstand, and a single chair completed the furnishings. Alara busied herself, lighting candles and pouring water from a ewer into a large wooden tub that had been placed before the fire. "I will bring you dry clothes," she said, her voice softening slightly. "And food. You must be famished." Beatrice nodded, her body aching with exhaustion. "Thank you, Alara." As the housekeeper left, Beatrice sank onto the chair, her mind racing. She was safe for now. But she was also trapped, a guest or perhaps a prisoner in the fortress of the enigmatic Winter Lord. What were his intentions? Why had he allowed her to enter? The stories she had heard about him, the rumors of his ruthlessness, filled her with a deep unease. She stripped off her wet clothes, the cold air raising goosebumps on her skin. The bath water was blissfully warm, easing the stiffness from her muscles. She closed her eyes, letting the heat seep into her bones, trying to push away the fear and uncertainty that gnawed at her. When Alara returned, she brought a simple gown of soft wool, a warm tunic, and thick stockings. She also carried a tray laden with food, roasted meat, bread, cheese, and a small flagon of wine. "Eat," Alara instructed, placing the tray on the chest. "You need to regain your strength." Beatrice obeyed, the food surprisingly flavorful after her long, arduous journey. The wine warmed her from the inside, chasing away the last vestiges of the chill. As she ate, Alara remained silent, watching her with an expression that was difficult to decipher. Was it concern, pity, or something else entirely? "Why did he let me in?" Beatrice asked finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Sir Geoffrey, he does not seem the type to offer charity to strangers." Alara hesitated, her eyes flickering towards the door. "The Lord of Moray has his reasons," she said quietly. "He is a man of complexities. Do not judge him too harshly, my lady. He has endured much." The words, spoken with such quiet conviction, intrigued Beatrice. What had the Winter Lord endured? What secrets did he keep hidden behind that cold, impassive facade? "He said I should not be here," Beatrice continued, remembering his words at the gate.
Why?
Alara sighed, her gaze drifting towards the fire. Moray is not a place for outsiders, my lady. It is a place of shadows. And shadows can be dangerous. A chill, deeper than the one caused by the storm, ran through Beatrice. She finished her meal in silence, the questions swirling in her mind. She was safe, for now. But she was also surrounded by mysteries, by unspoken dangers. And she knew, with a growing certainty, that her encounter with the Winter Lord was far from over. It was, in fact, just the beginning. The warmth of the fire was a small comfort against the growing sense of foreboding that settled over her, a premonition of the trials and tribulations that lay ahead in this sanctuary of shadows. Chapter 3. The Lord of Ice and Stone. The morning light, filtered through the narrow window, painted a pale rectangle on the stone floor. Beatrice awoke stiff and sore, her body protesting the previous day's ordeal. The fire had burned down to embers, leaving a chill in the air. She dressed quickly in the clothes Alara had provided, the soft wool a welcome contrast to the rough fabric of her traveling attire. A knock on the door startled her. It was Alara, carrying a tray with a simple breakfast of porridge, bread, and honey. Sir Geoffrey requests your presence in the solar after you have broken your fast, she announced, her expression neutral. Beatrice's heart quickened. The prospect of facing the Winter Lord again filled her with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. She ate quickly, her mind racing with questions. What did he want? Was he going to send her back to Blackmere, to the fate she had risked everything to escape? The solar was a large, well-lit room on the upper floor of the keep. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating tapestries depicting scenes of falconry and hunting. A long, polished table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Sir Geoffrey sat at the head of the table, studying a map spread out before him. He was dressed in dark, practical clothing, a leather jerkin over a linen shirt, close-fitting breeches, and sturdy boots. He looked less imposing than he had the previous night, but no less formidable. He looked up as she entered, his gray eyes assessing her with that same unsettling intensity. Lady Beatrice, he acknowledged, his voice deep and resonant. I trust you slept well. As well as could be expected, Sir Geoffrey, she replied, meeting his gaze. Considering the circumstances. He gestured to a chair opposite him. Please sit. Beatrice obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt like a small bird facing a hawk, vulnerable and exposed. He folded the map and set it aside, his gaze never leaving her. You are a long way from Blackmere, my lady. And your brother, I presume, is not aware of your departure. Beatrice swallowed, her throat dry. No, he is not. You ran away. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. I was escaping a situation I found unacceptable. She chose her words carefully, unwilling to reveal the full extent of her desperation. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. A forced marriage, perhaps? Beatrice's eyes widened. How could he know? Had Alaric already sent word, demanding her return? I have eyes and ears throughout the north, Lady Beatrice, he said, as if reading her thoughts. The affairs of Blackmere are not unknown to me. Your brother's ambition is well known. And you disapprove? She asked, surprised by his candor. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. Let us say that I understand the pressures of duty and the lure of power. But I also believe in choice. A woman should have the right to choose her own destiny. His words resonated deeply within her. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged her right to refuse Alaric's plans. But why would the Winter Lord, a man known for his ruthlessness, care about the fate of a runaway noblewoman? Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Because, Lady Beatrice, I believe we can help each other. Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. Help each other? What did he mean? Your brother seeks an alliance with Lord Elric, he continued. An alliance that would threaten the balance of power in the north. An alliance that I oppose. And you believe I can help you prevent this alliance? She asked, incredulous. You are the key, Lady Beatrice. Without you, the marriage cannot take place. And without the marriage, the alliance will falter. "But what do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What is the price of your assistance?" He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "I want information," he said finally. "Information about your brother's plans, his allies, his weaknesses. And I want your cooperation. In return, I will offer you sanctuary. I will protect you from your brother and from Lord Elric. I will give you the freedom you seek." The offer was both tempting and terrifying. Sanctuary, freedom, those were the things she had longed for. But the price, information, cooperation, it meant betraying her brother, her family. It meant aligning herself with the Winter Lord, a man she barely knew, a man shrouded in mystery and rumor. She looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, the weariness in his eyes. She saw a man who had known betrayal, who had faced difficult choices. And she saw, perhaps, a flicker of understanding, a hint of compassion beneath the cold exterior. I need time to think," she said, her voice unsteady. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "You have until the sun sets tomorrow, Lady Beatrice. Then I will require your answer. Your fate, and perhaps the fate of the North, hangs in the balance." He rose from his chair, signaling the end of the meeting. Beatrice stood as well, her legs trembling slightly. She left the solar, her mind reeling. She had been given a choice, a chance to escape the fate Alaric had planned for her. But the choice was not a simple one. It was a choice between loyalty and freedom, between family and self-preservation. And the consequences of her decision would be far-reaching, affecting not only her own life, but the lives of many others. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating, as she walked back to her chamber, the echoes of the Winter Lord's words ringing in her ears. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Frozen Halls. The day stretched before Beatrice, long and fraught with uncertainty. She paced the confines of her chamber, the Winter Lord's offer echoing in her mind. Betrayal felt like a cold, sharp stone in her gut. Alaric, for all his flaws and ambition, was still her brother. Family loyalty was ingrained in her, a fundamental tenet of her upbringing. Yet, the thought of returning to Blackmere, of being forced to marry Lord Elric, filled her with a dread so profound it bordered on terror. She tried to distract herself, examining the tapestries that adorned the chamber walls. They depicted scenes of Moray's history, battles won, treaties forged, generations of stern-faced lords and ladies. They offered no solace, only a reminder of the power and legacy she was now entangled with. Later, Alara brought her a simple lunch of bread and cheese, her expression unreadable. Beatrice attempted conversation, hoping to glean some insight into the Winter Lord, but the housekeeper remained guarded, offering only cryptic remarks about his burden and the sacrifices he had made. Seeking a change of scenery, Beatrice ventured out into the fortress. The keep was a labyrinth of corridors and stairwells, its stone walls cold and unforgiving. She passed guards, servants, and other inhabitants of Moray, all of whom regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She felt like an outsider, a stranger in a strange land. She found herself drawn to the chapel, a small, dimly lit space tucked away in a quiet corner of the keep. The air was thick with the scent of incense and beeswax, the only light filtering through stained glass windows depicting various saints. She knelt before the altar, seeking a moment of peace, a respite from the turmoil within her. She prayed, not for guidance, but for strength. Strength to make the right decision, whatever that might be. Strength to face the consequences of her choice. Strength to endure the loneliness and uncertainty that lay ahead. As she prayed, she heard a soft footstep behind her. She turned, expecting to see Alara, but instead, it was a young woman, perhaps a few years younger than herself, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She wore a simple gown of gray wool, a silver chain with a small, intricately carved cross hanging around her neck. "Forgive me, my lady," the young woman said, her voice soft and melodic. "I did not mean to intrude. I am Lyra." "Beatrice," she replied, rising from her knees. "I know," Lyra said, her smile widening. Everyone in Moray knows of the lady who arrived in the storm. You are a subject of much speculation. Beatrice felt a blush rise to her cheeks.
Imagineiam.
Do not be alarmed, Lyra said, her eyes filled with sympathy. Moray is not always welcoming to strangers. But we are not all as cold as we seem. You are kind, Beatrice said, surprised by the young woman's openness. Lyra shrugged. I am the healer here. I tend to the sick and injured. It is my duty to be compassionate. Beatrice felt a sense of relief at finding someone who seemed genuinely friendly. It is a lonely place, this fortress. It can be, Lyra agreed. But it is also a place of strength and resilience. Sir Geoffrey, he is a good man, despite what the rumors say. Beatrice's heart quickened. What rumors? Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering towards the chapel door. Whispers mostly. About his past. About the tragedy that befell him. About the reasons he keeps himself so isolated. What tragedy? Beatrice asked, her curiosity piqued. Lyra lowered her voice, as if afraid of being overheard. His wife, she died. Many years ago. In childbirth. Along with their child. It broke him. He has never been the same. The revelation struck Beatrice with unexpected force. The Winter Lord, the man of ice and stone, had known love, had known loss. It humanized him, made him seem less remote, less terrifying. I am sorry, Beatrice said, her voice filled with genuine sympathy. Lyra nodded. He carries a heavy burden. The weight of his grief, the responsibility for his people, it is a lot for one man to bear. And yet, he offered me sanctuary, Beatrice said, still trying to reconcile the rumors with the reality of his offer. He sees something in you, my lady, Lyra said, her eyes searching Beatrice's. Something worth saving. Do not betray his trust. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Beatrice felt a renewed sense of conflict. She had been given a glimpse into the Winter Lord's past, a glimpse into the pain that lay hidden beneath his cold exterior. It made her decision even more difficult, the stakes even higher. She spent the rest of the day in quiet contemplation, weighing her options, struggling to find a path that would not lead to utter ruin. The whispers of Moray, the secrets it held, the complexities of its lord, all swirled around her, creating a sense of unease and anticipation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard, she knew she could no longer postpone her decision. She had to face the Winter Lord, and she had to give him her answer. The fate of not only her, but the entire North rested on her shoulders, and the choice was a heavy burden. Chapter 5. A bargain struck in winter. The summons came as Beatrice was watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, painting the snow-capped peaks in hues of orange and purple. A young page, his face pale and anxious, delivered the message. Sir Geoffrey awaited her in the library. The library was a room she hadn't yet explored, a hidden sanctuary tucked away at the end of a long, winding corridor. It was a circular chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with ancient tomes and scrolls. A fire burned brightly in a large hearth, casting a warm, flickering light that danced on the leather-bound books. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, beeswax, and wood smoke. Sir Geoffrey stood before the fire, his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him. He was dressed in a dark blue tunic, the silver wolf's head on his chest gleaming in the firelight. He turned as she entered, his gray eyes searching hers. Lady Beatrice, he said, his voice devoid of any discernible emotion. You have had time to consider my offer. Beatrice took a deep breath, steeling herself. I have, Sir Geoffrey. He gestured to a chair near the fire.
Seat.
And tell me your decision. She obeyed, the warmth of the fire a welcome comfort against the chill of the stone walls. She looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, the weariness in his eyes. She remembered Lyra's words, the glimpse she had been given into his past, the tragedy that had shaped him. I will accept your offer, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I will provide you with the information you seek. I will cooperate with you. In return, I ask for your protection, your sanctuary. He remained silent for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Then he nodded, a slight inclination of his head. You have made a wise choice, Lady Beatrice. A dangerous one, but a wise one. It is a betrayal, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Of my brother, my family. It is a choice, he corrected her. A choice to protect yourself, to forge your own destiny. Loyalty is a virtue, but it should not be a chain that binds you to a fate you do not desire. His words resonated with her, echoing the thoughts she had been struggling with all day. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the conflict between duty and desire. What information do you require? She asked, her voice low. He moved to a table near the window, where a map of the north was spread out. Your brother's plans for the alliance with Lord Elric. The details of their agreement. The strength of their forces. Their weaknesses. Beatrice hesitated. This was the true test, the moment where she crossed the line from runaway to informant. She took a deep breath and began to speak, revealing the secrets she had guarded for so long. She told him of Alaric's ambition, his desire to expand Blackmir's influence, his willingness to use her as a pawn in his game. She described the terms of the betrothal agreement, the lands and resources that were to be exchanged. She detailed the strengths of Alaric's army, the weaknesses of his defenses, the allies he had cultivated, the enemies he had made. As she spoke, Sir Geoffrey listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. He asked questions, probing for details, clarifying uncertainties. He was a skilled strategist, she realized, a man who understood the intricacies of power and warfare. The hours passed, the fire burning low, the only sound the scratching of Sir Geoffrey's quill as he took notes on a piece of parchment. Beatrice felt a strange sense of relief as she unburdened herself, as she shared the secrets that had weighed so heavily on her. It was a betrayal, yes, but it was also a liberation. Finally, she was finished. She had told him everything she knew. She looked at him, exhausted but strangely calm. Is that sufficient? He rolled up the parchment and set it aside. It is a start, Lady Beatrice. A valuable start. But this is only the beginning. The game of power is a complex one, and it is constantly shifting. I will require your continued cooperation. I understand, she said, her voice low. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. You are a brave woman, Lady Beatrice. Braver than you know. You have taken a great risk, trusting me with this information. I had little choice, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. You always have a choice, he corrected her. You chose to flee Blackmir. You chose to seek shelter here.
And you chose to trust me.
Those choices, they define you. They make you who you are. His words struck a chord within her. He was right. She had made choices, difficult choices, and those choices had brought her here, to this fortress, to this bargain. He moved closer, his presence filling the room. I will keep my promise, Lady Beatrice. I will protect you. I will give you the sanctuary you seek. But I also expect your loyalty. Betray me, and you will face the consequences. The threat, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. Beatrice met his gaze, her chin lifted. I understand, Sir Geoffrey. I will not betray you. He nodded, a slight softening of his features.
Good.
Then we have an agreement. A bargain struck in winter. A bargain that will bind us together, for better or for worse. He extended his hand, his fingers long and strong. Beatrice hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, surprisingly reassuring. It was a formal gesture, a seal on their agreement. But it was also something more. It was a connection, a spark of understanding between two people who had both known loss, who had both made difficult choices. It was the beginning of a partnership, a fragile alliance forged in the heart of winter, an alliance that would be tested by the trials and tribulations that lay ahead. The fire crackled, a silent witness to the promises made. Chapter 6. The Price of Shelter. The days that followed settled into a strange, unsettling routine. Beatrice remained confined to the fortress, her movements restricted, her interactions limited. She was treated with a cautious courtesy, a guest in name, but a prisoner in reality. The inhabitants of Moray regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, their whispers following her like shadows. Alara remained her primary point of contact, providing her with meals, clothing, and the occasional, cryptic update on the goings-on within the fortress. Lyra, the healer, visited her regularly, offering a welcome respite from the isolation and a glimpse into the lives of the people who called Moray home. Beatrice spent her time exploring the keep, mapping its labyrinthine corridors and hidden chambers. She discovered a small, neglected garden tucked away behind the kitchens, a patch of frozen earth that hinted at the promise of spring. She spent hours in the library, losing herself in the ancient tomes and scrolls, seeking knowledge, seeking distraction. She saw Sir Geoffrey infrequently, usually at meals in the Great Hall, where he presided over his household with a quiet authority. He rarely spoke to her directly, but she often caught him watching her, his gray eyes filled with an unreadable expression. She wondered what he thought of her, this runaway noblewoman who had become his informant, his ally. One evening, as she was returning to her chamber after a solitary walk along the battlements, she encountered him in a dimly lit corridor. He was standing by a window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape, his face etched with a deep weariness. He turned as she approached, his expression softening slightly. "Lady Beatrice," he acknowledged, his voice low. "You seem restless." "I am confined," she replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless." He nodded, his gaze returning to the window. "Freedom has a price, my lady. You knew that when you made your choice." "I did," she agreed. "But I did not realize how isolating it would be." He turned back to her, his eyes searching hers. "You are not alone, Lady Beatrice. You have my protection. And you have a purpose here. To be your spy," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "To be my ally," he corrected her. "To help me prevent a war that would cost countless lives. To help me protect my people." His words reminded her of the larger stakes involved, the reason she had agreed to his offer. It was not just about her own freedom, it was about something greater, something more important. "I understand," she said, her voice softer now. "But it is difficult. To betray my own family." He stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow corridor. "Family is not always defined by blood, Lady Beatrice. It is defined by loyalty, by trust, by shared purpose. You may find that family here in Moray." His words surprised her. Was he suggesting that she could find a place here, among these strangers, these people who regarded her with suspicion? I do not know," she said, her voice hesitant. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm, but not quite touching her. "Give it time, Lady Beatrice. Time to heal. Time to find your place. Time to trust." The gesture, so unexpected, so gentle, sent a shiver through her. She looked at him, at the lines of weariness around his eyes, the hint of vulnerability in his expression. She saw, not the fearsome winter lord, but a man who had known pain, who had known loneliness. "Thank you, Sir Geoffrey," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For everything." He nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "You are welcome, Lady Beatrice. Now it is late. You should rest." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the corridor. She watched him go, her heart filled with a confusing mix of emotions. Fear, uncertainty, but also something else. A flicker of hope, perhaps. A sense of connection. As she returned to her chamber, she realized that the price of shelter at Moray was more than just information, more than just cooperation. It was a surrender, a relinquishing of her past, a willingness to embrace the unknown. It was a leap of faith, a trust placed in a man who was both her captor and her protector. And as she drifted off to sleep, she wondered if that trust was misplaced, or if it was the key to finding the freedom she so desperately sought, not just from Alaric's grasp, but from the prison of her own past. The fortress walls stood as a chilling testament, holding in it all that had unfolded. Chapter 7. Scars of the Past. Several weeks had passed since Beatrice's arrival at Moray, the initial shock of her confinement giving way to a grudging acceptance of her new reality. The rhythm of life within the fortress, once alien and unsettling, had become almost familiar. The clanging of the blacksmith's forge, the shouts of the men at arms training in the courtyard, the hushed prayers in the chapel, these were now the sounds of her everyday existence. She continued to provide Sir Geoffrey with information, gleaned from her memories of Blackmere and her knowledge of the Northern Lords. He, in turn, kept his promise of protection, ensuring that she was treated with respect, if not warmth. Their interactions remained formal, their conversations focused on strategy and intelligence, yet Beatrice sensed a subtle shift in their relationship. A growing understanding, perhaps a hint of mutual respect. One afternoon, while exploring a previously unexplored wing of the keep, Beatrice stumbled upon a small, enclosed garden, overgrown and neglected. It was a stark contrast to the meticulously maintained herb garden she had discovered earlier, a testament to a time when beauty had been valued alongside practicality. In the center of the garden stood a weathered stone statue of a woman, her face obscured by moss and lichen. Intrigued, Beatrice began to clear away the weeds and debris, her hands working tirelessly to uncover the hidden beauty beneath. As she worked, she felt a sense of peace, a connection to the past, to the women who had once tended this garden, who had found solace in its quiet beauty. She was so engrossed in her task that she didn't hear Sir Geoffrey approach. He stood at the entrance to the garden, watching her, his expression unreadable. This was her garden, he said, his voice low and filled with a sadness she had not heard before. Beatrice turned, startled. "Whose?" "My wife's," he replied, his gaze fixed on the statue. "Alera's." She loved flowers. She loved beauty. The name struck Beatrice. Alera. The same name as the housekeeper, and the same name as her own lost horse. A coincidence? Or something more? "The housekeeper, she is named after your wife?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He nodded, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "She was her sister. She has served me loyally ever since." The pieces began to fall into place. The housekeeper's devotion to Sir Geoffrey, her cryptic remarks about his burden, the tragedy that Lyra had hinted at, it all made sense now. "I am sorry," Beatrice said, her voice filled with genuine sympathy. "For your loss." He turned to her, his gray eyes filled with a depth of sorrow that took her breath away. "It was a long time ago, but the scars, they remain." He gestured to the statue. "I had this made in her memory, but I could not bear to look at it. I had the garden walled off. I tried to forget." "But you cannot forget," Beatrice said softly, understanding his pain. "Grief, it lingers. It becomes a part of you." He nodded, his gaze fixed on hers. "You understand." It was not a question, but a statement of fact. He saw in her, perhaps, a kindred spirit, someone who had also known loss, who had also carried the burden of grief. "My mother," Beatrice said, her voice barely a whisper. "She died when I was young. I still miss her." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small garden. "What was she like?" Beatrice smiled, a bittersweet memory rising to the surface. "She was kind, gentle. She loved music. She used to sing to me lullabies." "Alera loved music too," he said, his voice softening. "She had a beautiful voice, like an angel." They stood in silence for a moment, sharing a moment of unexpected intimacy, a connection forged in the shared experience of loss. "I should let you continue your work," he said finally, his voice regaining its usual formality. "No," Beatrice said, surprising herself.
"Stay."
"Tell me about her." "About Alera." He hesitated, then, with a sigh, he sat down on a stone bench near the statue. Beatrice joined him, her heart filled with a strange mixture of sadness and curiosity. He began to speak, his voice low and hesitant at first, then gaining strength as he recounted memories of his wife. He told her of their courtship, their marriage, their brief, happy years together. He spoke of her kindness, her generosity, her unwavering spirit. He spoke of the joy she had brought into his life, the light she had shone into his darkness. As he spoke, Beatrice saw a different side of the Winter Lord, a side that was vulnerable, human, capable of deep love and profound grief. The ice and stone that had seemed so impenetrable began to melt away, revealing the wounded heart beneath. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden. The air grew cold, but Beatrice did not feel it. She was lost in his story, captivated by the image of the woman he had loved, the woman who had left such an indelible mark on his life. And then she was gone, he said, his voice breaking. Taken from me too soon. Along with our child. The pain in his voice was raw, palpable. Beatrice reached out, her hand covering his. It was a gesture of comfort, of empathy, of shared grief. He looked at her, his eyes filled with tears he could not shed. Thank you, he whispered, for listening. The touch, the shared moment of vulnerability, created a shift in their relationship. The formal barriers between them, though still present, had been breached. A deeper connection had been forged, a bond of understanding and compassion. As they walked back to the keep, side by side, the silence between them was no longer strained, but comfortable, filled with the unspoken knowledge of shared pain and the fragile hope of healing. The scars of the past remained, etched deep within their hearts, but perhaps, together, they could find a way to bear them, to find a way to move forward, to find a way to live again. The setting sun seemed to whisper a silent blessing. Chapter 8. Thawing Hearts. Following their shared moment of vulnerability in the neglected garden, a subtle but significant shift occurred in the dynamic between Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey. The formal distance that had characterized their interactions began to thaw, replaced by a tentative warmth, a fragile understanding. They began to seek each other's company, finding solace in shared moments of quiet conversation. They would meet in the library, discussing not just matters of strategy and intelligence but also books, history, and the world beyond Moray. They would walk together in the courtyard, observing the training of the men-at-arms, sharing observations and insights. They would even, on occasion, venture into the snow-covered landscape surrounding the fortress, their conversations punctuated by the crunch of their boots on the frozen ground. Beatrice learned more about Sir Geoffrey's past, not just the tragedy of Alara's death, but also his childhood, his training as a knight, his experiences in battle. She discovered a man of deep intelligence, unwavering loyalty, and a profound sense of duty. She also saw the scars that war and loss had left upon him, the shadows that haunted his eyes. Sir Geoffrey, in turn, learned more about Beatrice's life at Blackmere, her strained relationship with her brother, her yearning for independence, her quiet strength and resilience. He saw in her a woman who had been underestimated, undervalued, a woman who deserved more than the fate that had been planned for her. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire in the library, Beatrice noticed a small, intricately carved wooden box on a shelf. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. "What is this?" she asked, her voice curious. Sir Geoffrey's expression softened. It was Alara's. She used to keep trinkets in it. Small treasures. He took the box from her and opened it. Inside were a collection of small objects, a dried flower, a smooth, gray stone, a silver locket, a piece of embroidered silk. Each object, seemingly insignificant, held a memory, a story. He picked up the locket, his fingers tracing the delicate filigree. This was her mother's. She gave it to her on her wedding day. He opened the locket, revealing a miniature portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. It was the woman Beatrice had seen in the stained glass window of the chapel, the woman Lyra had identified as Alara's mother. "She is beautiful," Beatrice said softly. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the portrait. She was like an angel, just like Alara. He closed the locket and handed it to Beatrice. "Keep it," he said, his voice low, "as a reminder of her and of us." Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. The gesture, so intimate, so personal, took her by surprise. She looked at the locket, then at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. I don't know what to say," she stammered. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his features. "You do not need to say anything, Lady Beatrice. Just accept it, as a token of my regard." She clutched the locket tightly in her hand, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was more than just a trinket, it was a symbol of their growing connection, a testament to the trust that had blossomed between them. As the days turned into weeks, the thawing of their hearts continued. The initial fear and suspicion that Beatrice had felt upon arriving at Moray had dissipated, replaced by a sense of belonging. She was no longer just a guest, a prisoner, an informant, she was a friend. Perhaps even something more. The change was noticed by the inhabitants of Moray as well. The whispers that had followed her initially had faded, replaced by a cautious acceptance, a grudging respect. Alara, the housekeeper, treated her with a quiet warmth, her eyes filled with a knowing understanding. Lyra, the healer, became her confidant, sharing stories of the fortress and its people, offering advice and support. One evening, as Beatrice was preparing for bed, Alara entered her chamber carrying a tray with a steaming cup of herbal tea. "For a restful sleep," she said, placing the tray on the table. "Thank you, Alara," Beatrice replied, smiling. Alara hesitated, her gaze flickering towards the locket that Beatrice now wore around her neck. "He cares for you, my lady," she said quietly. "More than he has cared for anyone since her." Beatrice's heart quickened. "He is a good man," she replied, her voice low. Alara nodded.
He is.
"But he has been wounded.
Deeply.
He needs someone to heal him, to love him." She looked at Beatrice, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and concern. "Be careful, my lady, with your heart, and with his." She left the chamber, leaving Beatrice alone with her thoughts. Alara's words echoed in her mind, confirming what she had already begun to suspect. Her feelings for Sir Geoffrey were growing stronger, deeper, more complex. She was falling in love with the Winter Lord, the man of ice and stone, the man who had offered her sanctuary and, in doing so, had captured her heart. But she knew that loving him was a dangerous game, a risk that could lead to heartbreak and despair. He was still haunted by the past, still grieving for his lost love. Could she ever truly reach him? Could she ever truly replace Alara in his heart? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered, as she drifted off to sleep, the locket a tangible reminder of the fragile, blossoming love that was both her hope and her fear. Chapter 9. The Serpent in the Snow. News arrived at Moray with the chilling swiftness of a winter gale. A messenger, his horse lathered and exhausted, brought word from a border outpost. Alaric had moved. He had forged his alliance with Lord Elric, and their combined forces were marching north, towards Moray. The fortress erupted in a flurry of activity. Men at arms sharpened their swords, archers strung their bows, scouts rode out to assess the enemy's strength and position. The air was thick with tension, with the anticipation of battle, with the fear of the unknown. Beatrice found Sir Geoffrey in the war room, a large, sparsely furnished chamber dominated by a massive table covered with maps and charts. He was surrounded by his captains, their faces grim, their voices low and urgent. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "They are coming," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Sooner than we anticipated." Beatrice's heart sank. The threat she had been informing him about was now a reality. The war she had hoped to prevent was about to begin. "How many?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Too many," he replied, his gaze fixed on the map. "Alaric has raised a considerable force, and Elric's men are seasoned veterans." "What is our plan?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He outlined his strategy, his voice calm and measured, explaining the defensive preparations, the deployment of his troops, the anticipated lines of attack. He was a skilled commander, she realized, a man who had planned for this contingency, a man who was prepared to defend his fortress and his people. "We will hold them at the pass," he said, pointing to a narrow defile on the map. "It is our strongest defensive position. We will make them pay dearly for every inch of ground they take." Beatrice looked at him, at the determination in his eyes, the unwavering resolve in his voice. She knew that he would fight to the death to protect his home, his people, his legacy. And she knew, with a growing certainty, that she would stand by him, whatever the cost. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice low. He looked at her, his expression softening slightly.
"Stay safe," he said.
"That is all I ask. This is my fight, not yours." "It is my fight too," she insisted. "I am a part of this now. I will not hide while you and your men risk your lives." He hesitated, then nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Very well, Lady Beatrice. Your courage is admirable. You may assist Lyra in the infirmary. We will undoubtedly have wounded." It was not the role she had envisioned for herself, but she accepted it without complaint. She would do whatever she could to help, to support, to contribute to the defense of Moray. The following days were filled with a frenetic energy. Beatrice worked alongside Lyra, preparing the infirmary, gathering supplies, tending to the minor injuries that inevitably occurred during the preparations for war. She saw the fear in the eyes of the women and children, the grim determination on the faces of the men. She felt the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that her actions, her choices, had contributed to this impending conflict. One evening, as she was walking through the courtyard, she overheard a conversation between two men-at-arms. They were discussing Alaric, their voices filled with a mixture of fear and hatred. "He is a serpent," one of them said, his voice low and venomous. "A traitor to his own sister. He would sell her to the highest bidder, like a piece of livestock." "He will pay for his treachery," the other replied, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Sir Geoffrey will make him pay." The words, though spoken in anger, struck Beatrice with unexpected force. She had known that Alaric was ambitious, that he was ruthless, but she had never thought of him as evil. She had always believed, deep down, that he cared for her in his own way. But the men-at-arms' words, coupled with the impending war, forced her to confront a harsh reality. Alaric was not just her brother, he was her enemy. He had made his choice, and that choice had put him on the opposite side of this conflict. She found Sir Geoffrey on the battlements, gazing out at the darkening landscape. The snow had stopped falling, and the sky was clear, filled with a million stars. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. He turned as she approached, his expression unreadable. "They are close," he said, his voice low. "We will see their campfires soon." Beatrice nodded, her heart heavy. "I overheard some of the men talking," she said, her voice hesitant. They called Alaric a serpent." He sighed, his gaze returning to the horizon. "He has earned that title, Lady Beatrice. He has betrayed not only you, but the entire North. He has chosen power over loyalty, greed over honor." I never thought he was capable of this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and pity. "People can surprise you, Lady Beatrice. Sometimes in the worst possible way." He placed his hand on her arm, a gesture of comfort, of reassurance. "Do not blame yourself, Lady Beatrice. You did not choose this."
"He did.
"And he will face the consequences." The words, though meant to comfort her, sent a shiver through her. She knew that the consequences of Alaric's actions would be bloody, that many lives would be lost, that the landscape would be scarred by war. And she knew, with a growing dread, that she would be caught in the middle of it all, torn between her loyalty to Moray and the lingering remnants of her familial bond with the man who is now her enemy. The serpent in the snow had arrived, and its venomous bite would soon be felt by all. Chapter 10. A Knight's Torn Loyalty. The first clash came at dawn, a brutal, chaotic melee at the narrow pass that guarded the approach to Moray. Beatrice, stationed in the infirmary with Lyra, could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the fortress walls, the clang of steel on steel, the shouts of men, the screams of the wounded. The infirmary quickly filled with injured soldiers, their bodies bloodied and broken. Beatrice and Lyra worked tirelessly, tending to wounds, setting broken bones, comforting the dying. The air was thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and fear. Beatrice, despite her lack of experience, proved to be a capable assistant, her hands steady, her movements precise. She had a calming presence, a gentle touch that soothed the wounded, a quiet strength that inspired confidence. Lyra, watching her work, smiled. "You have a gift, my lady," she said. "A natural ability to heal, to comfort." Beatrice shrugged. "I am just doing what I can," she replied, her voice tired. As the day wore on, the fighting intensified. The defenders of Moray, outnumbered but fighting on their own ground, held their position, repelling wave after wave of attackers. But the cost was high. The infirmary overflowed with wounded, and the cries of the dying echoed through the halls. Beatrice, exhausted and emotionally drained, was tending to a young soldier, his leg shattered by a falling rock, when a commotion erupted at the entrance to the infirmary. A group of men at arms carried in a wounded man, his armor covered in blood, his face pale and drawn. It was Sir Geoffrey. Beatrice's heart leaped into her throat. She rushed to his side, her hands trembling. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and ragged. "What happened?" she asked, her voice choked with fear. One of the men at arms, his face grim, replied, "An arrow, my lady, to the shoulder. He lost a lot of blood." Lyra examined the wound, her expression grave. "The arrow is deep," she said. "We need to remove it. Quickly." They carefully removed his armor, revealing the extent of the injury. The arrow had pierced his shoulder, narrowly missing his lung. Blood welled up from the wound, staining the bandages. Beatrice held his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. His skin was cold, clammy. She whispered his name, her voice filled with desperation. "Geoffrey, please stay with me." Lyra worked swiftly, her hands skilled and sure. She removed the arrow, cleaned the wound, and applied a poultice to stop the bleeding. The procedure was agonizing, and Sir Geoffrey, though unconscious, moaned in pain. "He needs rest," Lyra said, her voice tired.
"And time to heal."
They carried him to a small chamber adjacent to the infirmary, a room normally reserved for the most seriously injured. Beatrice refused to leave his side. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, watching his chest rise and fall with each shallow breath. The hours passed, slow and agonizing. The sounds of battle continued outside, a constant reminder of the ongoing conflict. Beatrice prayed, not for victory, but for Geoffrey's survival. She prayed for the strength to endure, the courage to face whatever the future held. As night fell, the fighting subsided. The attackers had withdrawn, regrouping for another assault. The fortress was quiet, save for the moans of the wounded and the whispers of the anxious. Sir Geoffrey stirred, his eyes flickering open. He looked at Beatrice, his gaze unfocused, his expression confused. "Beatrice?" he whispered, his voice weak. "I am here," she replied, her voice filled with relief. "I am here." He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his shoulder, forcing him back down.
"The battle?
"They have withdrawn," she said.
For now.
You need to rest." He closed his eyes, his breathing still shallow. "Alaric?" The name, spoken with such venom, sent a shiver through Beatrice. She knew what he was asking. He wanted to know if his forces had prevailed, if Alaric had been defeated. "I do not know," she responded. He opened his eyes. He gazed deeply, the fight within him obvious. "I must go back," Sir Geoffrey said, gritting his teeth, fighting against the pain. "My men need me."
"No, you cannot," Beatrice said.
"You are too wounded, too weak." He stared at her, anguish in his eyes. "My loyalty," he said, each word a visible struggle, "my loyalty is torn. To my people.
And to you."
His voice failed. Exhaustion claimed him once more, and his eyes closed. Beatrice was left grappling with the depth of his confession. The Winter Lord, the man of ice and stone, was torn. Torn between his duty, his lifelong commitment to his people, and the burgeoning feelings he held for her. The weight of his words, the raw emotion behind them, filled her with a mixture of hope and dread. The battle raged on, not just outside the fortress walls, but within the hearts of those who fought, and within the heart of the woman who watched over the wounded knight, her own loyalties tested, her own future hanging precariously in the balance. The quiet of the night was broken only by Sir Geoffrey's painful breaths. Chapter 11. Revelations by Firelight. Sir Geoffrey's fever raged throughout the night, his body burning with infection, his mind lost in delirium. Beatrice remained by his side, tending to him with a fierce devotion, changing the bandages, applying cool compresses to his forehead, whispering words of comfort and encouragement. Lyra visited frequently, checking his condition, offering what little medical assistance she could. She was concerned, her expression grave.
The fever is high, she said. He is weak.
We must pray. Beatrice nodded, her heart heavy with fear. She had seen men die from lesser wounds. She knew that his survival was far from certain. As the night wore on, Sir Geoffrey's delirium worsened. He thrashed in his bed, muttering incoherently, his words a jumble of battle commands, childhood memories, and fragmented phrases. He called out for Alara, his dead wife, his voice filled with a longing that tore at Beatrice's heart. He also called out for Beatrice, his voice softer, more urgent. He spoke of her courage, her strength, her kindness. He spoke of his feelings for her, his words raw and unfiltered, stripped bare by the fever. "Beatrice, I love you," he whispered, his hand reaching out to her.
Do not leave me.
Beatrice took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of grief and joy. She had longed to hear those words, but not like this, not in the throes of delirium, not with the shadow of death hanging over them. "I will not leave you," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I am here. I will always be here." As dawn approached, the fever finally broke. Sir Geoffrey's breathing became more regular, his body relaxed. He opened his eyes, his gaze clear and focused. He looked at Beatrice, his expression filled with a mixture of confusion and relief. "Beatrice?" he whispered. "What happened?" "You were wounded," she replied, her voice trembling. "You have been delirious." "For hours." He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his shoulder, forcing him back down. "The battle?" "It is still ongoing," she said. "But you're safe."
For now.
He closed his eyes, his face etched with exhaustion. "I remember things," he said, his voice hesitant. "Things I said." Beatrice's heart quickened.
She knew what he was referring to.
His fevered confessions, his declarations of love. "I remember too," she said softly. He opened his eyes and looked at her, his gaze intense. "Did I dream it?" he asked. "Or did I truly say those things?" Beatrice took a deep breath, steeling herself. "You said them," she replied, her voice unwavering. "You said you loved me." He remained silent for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Then he nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "I meant them," he said, his voice low but firm. "Fever or no fever, I love you, Beatrice. I have for a long time." The words, spoken with such sincerity, such conviction, filled her with a joy so profound it took her breath away. She leaned down and kissed him, her lips gentle on his. It was a kiss of relief, of gratitude, of shared love. "I love you too, Geoffrey," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I have since I first saw you standing in the gate that stormy night." They held each other close, their bodies weak, but their hearts full. The sounds of battle outside faded into the background, drowned out by the intensity of their shared moment. As the day wore on, Sir Geoffrey's condition improved. The fever did not return, and the wound, though still painful, began to show signs of healing. Lyra was cautiously optimistic, her expression relieved.
He is strong, she said.
He will recover. But he needs rest.
And time.
Beatrice remained by his side, tending to his needs, sharing stories, offering comfort and support. They spoke of their feelings, their hopes, their fears. They spoke of the future, a future that was still uncertain, but a future that now included each other. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire in his chamber, Sir Geoffrey took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "I have something to tell you," he said, his voice serious. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Beatrice's heart quickened. She sensed that this was important, that it was something that had been weighing heavily on his mind. "What is it?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Alara, she did not die in childbirth," he said, his voice low and strained. "That is what I told everyone. That is what I wanted to believe. But it is not the truth." Beatrice's eyes widened.
What happened then?
He looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it took her breath away. "She took her own life," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She could not bear the loss of our child. She blamed herself. She left me a note, saying she was sorry, saying she could not go on." The revelation struck Beatrice with the force of a physical blow. She had known that Alara's death had been a tragedy, but she had never imagined the true horror of it. I am so sorry," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I had no idea." He nodded, his gaze returning to the fire. "I blamed myself," he said. "I should have seen the signs. I should have helped her. I failed her." "You did not fail her," Beatrice said firmly. "Grief, it can be overwhelming. It can consume you. It is not your fault." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for understanding, for not judging." He took her hand and kissed it, his lips lingering on her skin. "I hid the truth," he said, "from everyone, even from Alara's sister. I could not bear the shame, the guilt. I built a wall around my heart. I swore I would never love again." "But you did," Beatrice said softly. "You let me in." He smiled, a sad, tender smile. "You broke through the wall, Beatrice. You showed me that it was possible to love again, to live again." The revelations by firelight had brought them closer, stripping away the last vestiges of their secrets, their doubts, their fears. They had shared their deepest pain, their most profound vulnerabilities. And in doing so, they had forged a bond that was stronger, deeper, more enduring than anything they had known before. The truth, though painful, had set them free, free to love, free to heal, free to face the future together. Chapter 12. The Huntress and the Wolf. With Sir Geoffrey recovering, Beatrice found herself drawn back into the strategic planning of the defense. While she couldn't fight on the front lines, her knowledge of Alaric's tactics and the terrain around Blackmere proved invaluable. She spent hours with the remaining captains, poring over maps, suggesting alternative routes, identifying potential weaknesses in the enemy's advance. One crisp morning, as she was studying a map of the surrounding forests, a thought struck her. "There's a hidden path," she said, pointing to a narrow track barely visible on the parchment. "It leads through the Blackwood, bypassing the main pass. Alaric used to use it for hunting. He called it the Huntress's Path." The captains exchanged glances, their expressions intrigued. "Are you certain of this, my lady?" one of them asked. "Yes," Beatrice replied. "I have ridden it myself. Many times." "It is a risk," another captain said. "The path is narrow, difficult to navigate, especially in winter. But it could also be an advantage," Beatrice countered. "We could ambush them, catch them by surprise." The idea, though bold, was appealing. It offered a chance to strike a blow against Alaric's forces, to disrupt their advance, to turn the tide of the battle. Sir Geoffrey, though still weak, was consulted. He listened intently to Beatrice's proposal, his eyes studying the map, his mind weighing the risks and the potential rewards. "It is a gamble," he said finally, "but it might be worth taking. Beatrice, do you know this path well enough to lead a small force through it?" Beatrice's heart quickened. She had not expected this. She had not envisioned herself leading soldiers into battle. I do," she replied, her voice hesitant but firm. "I can do it." Sir Geoffrey nodded. "Then you shall," he said. "You will lead a small detachment of our best scouts. You will use the Huntress's Path to ambush the enemy. You will be the huntress, and they the prey." The plan was set in motion. Beatrice, clad in warm furs and leather, armed with a bow and a quiver of arrows, prepared to lead her small band of soldiers into the Blackwood. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement, of trepidation and determination. As she was about to depart, Sir Geoffrey stopped her. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "Be careful," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Come back to me." "I will," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "I promise." She kissed him, a brief, passionate kiss that conveyed all the love, all the fear, all the hope that they shared. Then, she turned and mounted her horse, a sturdy, sure-footed mare that had been chosen for its endurance and agility. She led her small force into the forest, the snow crunching beneath their horses' hooves. The huntress's path was as she remembered it, narrow, winding, overgrown with trees. It was a difficult journey, but they made good progress, guided by Beatrice's knowledge of the terrain. As they neared the point where the path intersected with the main road, they heard the sounds of Alaric's army approaching. Beatrice signaled her men to dismount and conceal themselves among the trees. They waited, hidden in the shadows, their hearts pounding, their breaths held. The enemy soldiers marched past, unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. Beatrice drew her bow, her hand steady, her aim true. She sighted on Alaric, who was riding at the head of his column, his face arrogant and confident. She hesitated for a moment, her finger on the string. He was her brother, her blood. Could she truly do this? Then, she remembered his betrayal, his ambition, his willingness to sacrifice her for his own gain. She remembered the wounded soldiers in the infirmary, the fear in the eyes of the people of Moray. She remembered Sir Geoffrey, his love, his trust, his unwavering belief in her. She released the arrow. It flew straight and true, striking Alaric's horse in the flank. The animal reared, throwing Alaric to the ground. Chaos erupted. The enemy soldiers, caught by surprise, scrambled for cover. Beatrice's men attacked, emerging from the trees, their swords flashing in the sunlight. The ambush was a success. The enemy was routed, their advance disrupted, their morale shattered. Alaric, injured but alive, was captured. Beatrice, her heart pounding, her body trembling, watched as her men secured the prisoners. She had done it. She had led the ambush. She had defeated her brother. She had helped to turn the tide of the battle. She was the huntress, and she had brought down her prey. But the victory was bittersweet. She had betrayed her brother, her family. She had chosen sides, and that choice had come at a cost. As she rode back to Moray, her small force victorious, she wondered what the future held. She had proven her courage, her loyalty, her strength. But she had also crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The huntress had claimed her prize, but the wolf, her brother, would now face the consequences of his actions. And she, the woman caught between two worlds, would have to live with the choices she had made. The forest was silent, the battle was over, and it was time to return. Chapter 13. Flight from Blackmere. The news of Alaric's capture and the rout of his forces spread through Moray like wildfire. The fortress erupted in celebration, the tension of the past weeks replaced by a surge of relief and jubilation. Beatrice, returning to the keep, was greeted as a hero. The men at arms cheered her, the women and children embraced her, Lyra greeted her with a tearful hug. She was hailed as the Huntress of Moray, the woman who had dared to defy her brother and had helped to secure a crucial victory. Sir Geoffrey, though still recovering from his wound, met her in the courtyard, his eyes filled with pride and admiration. He embraced her, his arms strong and reassuring around her. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You were magnificent." "We did it," she corrected him, her voice trembling slightly. "Together." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his features. "Together," he repeated. "Always." Alaric was brought before Sir Geoffrey, his hands bound, his face bruised and bloodied. He looked at Beatrice, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You betrayed me," he spat, his voice venomous. "Your own brother." Beatrice met his gaze, her chin lifted, her expression unwavering. "You betrayed me first," she replied, her voice cold and steady. "You try to sell me like a piece of property. You chose power over family. Over love." Alaric scoffed. "Love? What do you know of love?" "You are a fool, Beatrice. A naive, sentimental fool." Sir Geoffrey stepped forward, his voice commanding. Enough, he said. You are my prisoner now, Alaric. Your fate will be decided in due course. Alaric was taken away, his curses echoing through the courtyard. Beatrice watched him go, her heart filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. She had defeated her brother, but she had also lost him. The bond of family, once strong, was now broken, perhaps irreparably. As the celebrations continued, Beatrice found herself feeling increasingly uneasy. The victory, though significant, was not decisive. Lord Alaric's forces were still at large, and the threat of another attack remained. And Alaric, though imprisoned, was still a danger. He was cunning, resourceful, and he had allies, both within and outside Moray. She voiced her concerns to Sir Geoffrey, her voice low and urgent.
He will try to escape, she said.
Or someone will try to rescue him. He is too dangerous to be kept here. Sir Geoffrey nodded, his expression grave. I know, he said. I have considered this. But where can we send him? He has allies everywhere. Beatrice thought for a moment, her mind racing. Then, an idea struck her.
St. Martha's, she said.
The Abbey. My aunt, she is the abbess. She would keep him safe. And he would not be able to escape. The Abbey of St. Martha's was a remote, secluded sanctuary, known for its strict discipline and its impenetrable walls. It was a place where even the most powerful lords held no sway. Sir Geoffrey considered the proposal, his eyes studying her face.
It is a long journey, he said.
And dangerous. Especially now. With Alaric's forces still roaming the countryside. I will go with him, Beatrice said, her voice firm. I will ensure he reaches the Abbey safely. Sir Geoffrey hesitated. He did not want to risk her safety, but he also knew that she was right. Alaric was too dangerous to be kept at Moray. Very well, he said finally. You will leave at first light. You will take a small escort of my most trusted men. And you will return as soon as possible. Beatrice nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination. She was about to embark on another perilous journey, a journey that would take her back to the world she had fled, back to the shadows of Blackmere. She spent the rest of the day preparing for her departure, gathering supplies, choosing horses, conferring with the men who would accompany her. She also visited Sir Geoffrey, spending a quiet hour with him in his chamber, sharing their fears, their hopes, their love. As night fell, she stood on the battlements, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow on the fortress and the surrounding forests. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Sir Geoffrey joined her, his arm wrapping around her waist, his body warm against hers. Be careful, he whispered, his breath warm on her ear. And come back to me. Soon. I will, she replied, her voice filled with emotion. I promise. They kissed, a long, passionate kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their shared destiny. Then, Beatrice turned and walked away, her heart heavy but her resolve firm. She was leaving Moray, leaving the man she loved, but she was also returning to her past, to confront the shadows that had haunted her for so long. She was a huntress, a warrior, a woman who had chosen her own path, and she would not falter, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The flight from Blackmere had led her to this moment, and she was ready to face whatever the future held, with courage, with strength, and with the unwavering love of the Winter Lord to guide her. Chapter 14. The Gathering Storm. The journey to St. Martha's Abbey was arduous and fraught with peril. Beatrice, accompanied by a small escort of Sir Geoffrey's most trusted men, rode through a landscape ravaged by war, the signs of conflict everywhere, burned-out villages, abandoned farms, the lingering scent of death. They traveled in secrecy, avoiding the main roads, sticking to hidden paths and forest trails. They encountered bands of stragglers, both from Alaric's defeated army and from Lord Elric's remaining forces. They skirmished with some, evaded others, their progress slow and cautious. Alaric, bound and guarded, rode in silence, his expression sullen and resentful. He refused to speak to Beatrice, his eyes filled with a hatred that chilled her to the bone. She knew that he blamed her for his defeat, that he would never forgive her for her betrayal. One evening, as they were camped in a secluded clearing, a storm broke. The wind howled, the rain lashed down, the thunder roared. The small band of travelers huddled together, seeking shelter beneath the trees, their spirits dampened by the relentless onslaught of the elements. As the storm raged, Beatrice noticed a flicker of movement in the shadows. She alerted her men, their hands reaching for their swords. A group of figures emerged from the trees, their faces hidden by hoods, their weapons drawn. They were not soldiers, but bandits, outlaws who preyed on travelers, taking advantage of the chaos and disorder caused by the war. They attacked, their movements swift and brutal. Beatrice and her men fought back, defending themselves against the onslaught. The clearing erupted in a flurry of violence, the clang of steel on steel mingling with the shouts of men and the screams of the wounded. Beatrice, though not a trained warrior, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. She wielded her sword with skill and determination, protecting herself and her companions. During the melee, Alaric saw his chance. With a sudden, desperate lunge, he broke free from his guards and grabbed a discarded sword. He turned on Beatrice, his eyes filled with a murderous rage. "You will pay for this," he snarled, lunging at her. Beatrice parried his blow, her heart pounding in her chest. She was forced to fight her own brother, the man she had once loved, the man who now sought to kill her. They fought, their swords clashing in the rain-soaked clearing. Alaric was stronger, more experienced, but Beatrice was driven by a fierce determination to survive, to protect herself, to fulfill her mission. As they battled, one of the bandits, seeing an opportunity, attacked Beatrice from behind. She turned, parrying his blow, but leaving herself open to Alaric's attack. Alaric lunged, his sword aimed at her heart. But before he could strike, one of Beatrice's men intervened, stepping in front of her, taking the blow that was meant for her. The man fell, mortally wounded, his sacrifice saving Beatrice's life. Beatrice, enraged, turned on Alaric, her sword flashing in the rain. She disarmed him, knocking the sword from his hand, and forced him to his knees. She stood over him, her sword at his throat, her eyes blazing with anger. She could kill him, end his threat, avenge the death of her companion. But she hesitated. He was her brother, her blood. Could she truly take his life? The storm raged around them, mirroring the turmoil within her heart. The decision was hers, and hers alone. The fate of her brother, her enemy, rested in her hands. She lowered the sword. "I cannot," she said, struggling through the words. "You are my brother. I cannot end your life." Alaric glared at her, defiance still in his eyes. "Bind him," Beatrice commanded, her voice quivering, "and let us get away from this place." As they rode away, the storm began to clear. Through the broken clouds, she saw a shaft of moonlight. It gave her a glimpse of the man she'd ordered to be tied. Her brother, no longer the threat he had been, but a danger still. The storm within her, however, had not yet cleared. It raged on. Chapter 15. Echoes of Betrayal. They reached St. Martha's Abbey as dawn broke, the imposing stone walls rising from the mist-shrouded landscape like a fortress of faith. The abbey was a sanctuary, a place of peace and contemplation, far removed from the chaos and violence of the war-torn world. Beatrice was greeted by her aunt, the abbess, a woman of formidable presence and unwavering devotion. She was older than Beatrice remembered, her face lined with wrinkles, her eyes filled with a mixture of wisdom and weariness. "Beatrice, my child," the abbess said, embracing her niece. "You have come home, but you bring shadows with you." Beatrice explained the situation, her voice low and urgent, recounting the events of the past weeks, the war, Alaric's capture, her perilous journey. The abbess listened intently, her expression grave. "Your brother is a danger," she said. "Even here. He has allies. He will try to escape." "I know," Beatrice replied. "But where else can we keep him? He is too dangerous to be returned to Moray. And I could not bring myself to kill him." The abbess nodded, understanding the conflict within her niece's heart. "You are a good woman, Beatrice, but goodness can be a weakness. In times like these." She agreed to take Alaric into her custody, promising to keep him under strict guard to prevent him from escaping or communicating with his allies. Alaric was led away, his hands bound, his expression defiant. He did not speak to Beatrice, his eyes filled with a hatred that seemed to pierce her soul. Beatrice spent several days at the abbey, resting, recovering from her journey, seeking solace in the quiet routine of prayer and contemplation. She spoke with her aunt, sharing her fears, her doubts, her hopes. The abbess listened patiently, offering words of comfort and guidance. "You have chosen a difficult path, Beatrice," she said, "but you have followed your heart. You have done what you believe is right. That is all anyone can do." "But what if I am wrong?" Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. "What if my choices have made things worse?" The abbess smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. "We cannot know the future, Beatrice. We can only make the best decisions we can with the information we have. And we must trust in a higher power to guide us." Beatrice found comfort in her aunt's words, in the serenity of the abbey, in the unwavering faith of the women who lived there. But she could not escape the shadows that haunted her, the echoes of betrayal, the fear of the unknown. One evening, as she was walking in the abbey gardens, she encountered one of the nuns, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The nun was carrying a basket of herbs, her hands stained with their fragrance. "You are troubled, my lady," the nun said, her voice soft and melodic. Beatrice nodded. "I have much on my mind," she replied. "The world is a difficult place," the nun said, "filled with pain and suffering. But there is also beauty and love and hope. We must cling to those things, even in the darkest of times." She offered Beatrice a sprig of lavender, its fragrance sweet and calming. "This will help you sleep," she said, "and perhaps bring you peace." Beatrice took the lavender, her fingers brushing against the nun's. She thanked her, her heart filled with a fragile sense of gratitude. As she returned to her chamber, she placed the lavender under her pillow, its fragrance filling the small room. She lay down, her body tired, her mind racing. She thought of Sir Geoffrey, his love, his strength, his unwavering belief in her. She thought of Moray, the fortress that had become her home, the people who had become her family. She thought of Alaric, her brother, her enemy, the man she had betrayed, the man she had spared. She drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of war and peace, of love and loss, of betrayal and redemption. The echoes of the past swirled around her, mingling with the hopes and fears of the future. In her dream, she saw Sir Geoffrey, standing on the battlements of Moray, his face illuminated by the moonlight. He was calling out to her, his voice filled with urgency. "Beatrice, come back to me," he said. "I need you." She awoke with a start, her heart pounding, her body covered in a cold sweat. The dream had been so vivid, so real. She felt a sense of foreboding, a premonition of danger. She knew that she could not stay at the abbey any longer. She had to return to Moray, to Sir Geoffrey, to the man she loved, to the place where she belonged. The echoes of betrayal had faded, replaced by a stronger, more urgent call, the call of love, the call of duty, the call of home. She would leave at first light, her heart heavy, but her resolve firm. The gathering storm was approaching, and she had to be ready to face it, alongside the man who held her heart. Chapter 16. Beneath a blood-red moon. Beatrice's return journey to Moray was swift and uneventful, a stark contrast to the perilous trek to St. Martha's. The small escort, bolstered by a renewed sense of urgency, pushed their horses hard, covering the distance in record time. The landscape, though still scarred by war, seemed less threatening now, the shadows less menacing. As she approached Moray, she felt a surge of relief, a sense of homecoming. The fortress, silhouetted against the setting sun, was a welcome sight, a symbol of strength and resilience, a beacon of hope in a world of darkness. But as she drew closer, she noticed something amiss. The usual sounds of activity were absent. The courtyard was deserted. The gates were closed. The air was thick with an unsettling silence. She signaled her men to halt, her heart pounding with apprehension. "Something is wrong," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Be careful." They approached the gates cautiously, their weapons drawn. Beatrice called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Open the gates." "It is Beatrice. I have returned." There was no response. The silence continued, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant caw of a raven. Beatrice dismounted, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. She approached the gate, her eyes scanning the walls, the towers, the battlements. There was no sign of life, no indication of what had happened. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement in one of the towers. A figure, silhouetted against the moonlight, its face hidden in shadow. The figure raised its hand, holding something aloft. It was a torch, its flame burning brightly. The figure threw the torch. It landed on a pile of hay near the stables, igniting it instantly. Flames leaped up, spreading rapidly, consuming everything in their path. Beatrice realized, with a sickening horror, what was happening. Moray was under attack. And the attack had come from within. "Treachery," she shouted, her voice filled with rage and despair. "They have betrayed us." Her men rushed to the gate, trying to force it open, but it was too late. The fire was spreading too quickly, engulfing the stables, the courtyard, the surrounding buildings. Beatrice knew that they could not enter the fortress. They would be trapped, surrounded by flames, easy targets for the attackers. "We must retreat," she ordered, her voice desperate. "Find Sir Geoffrey. He must be warned." They turned and fled, their horses galloping away from the burning fortress, their hearts heavy with grief and anger. The betrayal had been swift, brutal, unexpected. Moray, their home, their sanctuary, was lost. As they rode, Beatrice looked back at the fortress, its towers silhouetted against a blood-red moon. The flames danced and swirled, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding landscape. The scene was a nightmare, a vision of hell, a testament to the treachery and cruelty of war. She did not know who had betrayed them, who had opened the gates to the enemy, who had set the fire that was now consuming Moray. But she knew one thing. She would find them, and she would make them pay. She also knew that Sir Geoffrey was in danger. If he was still alive, he was likely trapped, surrounded by enemies. She had to find him. She had to rescue him. She had to save the man she loved. The huntress had become the hunted. The protector had become the protected. The battle for Moray was not over, it had just begun. And Beatrice, fueled by rage, by grief, by love, would not rest until she had avenged the betrayal, until she had found Sir Geoffrey, until she had reclaimed her home, or perished in the attempt. The blood-red moon hung above, a silent witness to the unfolding tragedy, a harbinger of the trials and tribulations that lay ahead. Chapter 17. The Siege of Moray. The remnants of Moray's garrison, those who had escaped the inferno, rallied to Beatrice's side. They were a small, scattered force, their numbers depleted by death and desertion, their morale shattered by the suddenness and ferocity of the betrayal. But they were loyal to Sir Geoffrey, and they were determined to fight. Beatrice, her face grim, her eyes blazing with a cold fury, addressed them. "Moray has fallen," she said, her voice ringing out in the night. "But we have not. We will find Sir Geoffrey. We will reclaim our home. And we will make those who betrayed us pay." Her words, though spoken with passion, could not disguise the grim reality of their situation. They were outnumbered, outmatched, their fortress lost, their leader missing. Their chances of success seemed slim, almost impossible. But Beatrice refused to give up hope. She had survived too much, overcome too many obstacles, to surrender now. She had the blood of a huntress in her veins, the spirit of a warrior in her heart, and the love of a good man to fuel her determination. She led her small force through the night, following the faint trail left by the attackers. She knew that they were heading towards the coast, towards a small fishing village that was known to be a haven for smugglers and outlaws. She suspected that Lord Elric, or his allies, were behind the attack and that they would try to escape by sea. As dawn approached, they reached the village. It was a small, squalid settlement, its houses clustered around a narrow harbor. Several ships were anchored in the bay, their sails furled, their decks deserted. Beatrice divided her force, sending some to scout the village, others to guard the approaches, while she herself, accompanied by a handful of her most trusted men, approached the harbor.
She saw him then.
Sir Geoffrey. He was being held captive on one of the ships, his hands bound, his face bruised and bloodied. He was surrounded by guards, their weapons drawn, their expressions menacing. Beatrice's heart leaped into her throat. He was alive, but he was in grave danger. She knew that she could not attack directly. They were outnumbered, and any attempt to rescue him by force would likely result in his death. She needed a plan, a strategy, a way to outwit her enemies, to turn the tables on them. She remembered the hidden passages of Moray, the secret tunnels that honeycombed the fortress. She remembered the huntress's path, the ambush she had led, the victory she had achieved. She had to be cunning, resourceful. She had to be the huntress once more. She gathered her men, her voice low and urgent. "We will not attack directly," she said. "We will use stealth. We will infiltrate the ship. We will rescue Sir Geoffrey. And we will escape before they know what has happened." Her plan was bold, daring, almost suicidal. But it was their only hope. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped into the water, swimming silently towards the ship. They climbed aboard, unseen, unheard, their movements swift and stealthy. They found Sir Geoffrey in the ship's hold, guarded by 2 men. Beatrice and her companions attacked, their swords flashing in the dim light. The fight was brief and brutal. The guards were killed. Sir Geoffrey was freed. But as they were about to escape, they were discovered. An alarm was raised. The ship erupted in chaos. Soldiers poured onto the deck, their weapons drawn, their faces filled with rage. Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey, surrounded by enemies, fought back to back, their swords clashing against the steel of their attackers. They were outnumbered, outmatched, but they fought with the courage of desperation, the ferocity of love. The battle raged on the deck of the ship, beneath a sky that was beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn. The air was filled with the sounds of clashing steel, the shouts of men, the screams of the wounded. Beatrice, her body aching, her breath coming in ragged gasps, saw an opportunity. A small boat was moored alongside the ship, its oars ready, its sails furled. "The boat!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. "We must escape." They fought their way towards the boat, cutting down anyone who stood in their path. They reached the edge of the deck. Sir Geoffrey leaped into the boat. Beatrice followed close behind. They cast off, pushing away from the ship, rowing furiously towards the open sea. Arrows rained down around them, but they were out of range of the swords, out of reach of their pursuers. They escaped, leaving the burning ship behind them, leaving the chaos and violence of the battle behind them. They were safe for now, but the fight was far from over. As they sailed away, Beatrice looked back at the burning ship, at the village, at the distant silhouette of Moray, now a smoldering ruin. The siege was over, but the war had just begun. She had rescued Sir Geoffrey, but they had lost their home, their people, their fortress. They were fugitives, outlaws, hunted by their enemies. But they were together, and as long as they had each other, they had hope. The huntress and the wolf, bound by love, by loyalty, by a shared destiny, would continue to fight, to survive, to reclaim what they had lost. The dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, a promise of a new day, a new beginning, a new chapter in their epic saga. Chapter 18. A Love Forged in Flames. The small boat, battered by the waves and the wind, carried Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey away from the coast, away from the burning wreckage of Moray, away from the immediate danger of capture. They were adrift, their destination uncertain, their future precarious. They had little food, little water, only the clothes on their backs and the weapons they had managed to salvage. They were exhausted, wounded, emotionally drained, their bodies and spirits tested to their limits. But they were alive, and they were together. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow on the turbulent sea, they huddled together, seeking warmth and comfort in each other's arms. They spoke little, their words lost in the vastness of the ocean, their thoughts consumed by the events of the past few days. "Moray is gone," Sir Geoffrey said, his voice hoarse, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "Everything we built, everything we fought for destroyed." Beatrice nodded, her own heart heavy with grief. "It is a terrible loss," she said. "But it is not the end. We will rebuild. We will reclaim what is ours." He looked at her, his gaze intense, his expression filled with a mixture of admiration and love. "You are incredible, Beatrice," he said. "You saved my life. You rallied our men. You never gave up hope." She smiled, a weak, tired smile. "We saved each other," she replied. "We are stronger together." He kissed her, a long, passionate kiss that conveyed all the love, all the gratitude, all the shared pain and hope that they felt. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that promised a future that they would forge together, no matter the obstacles. They sailed for several days, their journey guided by the stars and the currents. They rationed their meager supplies, sharing what little they had, their bodies growing weaker, their spirits tested by hunger and thirst. They spoke of their past, their dreams, their fears. They shared stories, memories, moments of joy and sorrow. They confessed their love, their commitment, their unwavering belief in each other. One evening, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, Sir Geoffrey took Beatrice's hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that was both tender and fierce. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low and earnest. "When we first met, I was a broken man. I had lost everything. I had closed my heart to love, to life." He paused, his gaze shifting to the horizon, his expression filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "But you changed everything. You showed me that it was possible to heal, to love again, to find a new purpose." He turned back to her, his eyes shining with emotion. "You are my sanctuary, Beatrice. My hope. My love. I cannot imagine my life without you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, tarnished silver ring. It was the ring he had worn on his finger, the ring that had belonged to Alara, his dead wife. "I know this is not much," he said, his voice hesitant, "but I want you to have it, as a symbol of my love, of my commitment, of our future together." Beatrice's heart overflowed with emotion. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of joy and gratitude. She took the ring, her fingers trembling. "Geoffrey," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I love you, more than words can say. I will be your wife. I will stand by you always, no matter what." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand gentle on hers. It was a perfect fit, a symbol of their perfect union, a love forged in flames, tempered by adversity, strengthened by shared pain and hope. They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating as one. The setting sun cast a warm glow on their faces, illuminating their love, their commitment, their unwavering belief in each other. They were adrift, homeless, hunted, but they were not alone. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. They were the huntress and the wolf, bound by a love that was stronger than steel, a love that would endure, a love that would conquer all. The vast ocean stretched before them, an unknown future beckoning, but they faced it together, their hands clasped, their hearts intertwined, their love a beacon of hope in a world of darkness. Chapter 19. The Winter's Reckoning. Their escape by sea led them to a remote island, a windswept haven of jagged cliffs and hidden coves. It was a desolate place, sparsely inhabited, but it offered them a temporary refuge, a chance to rest, recover, and plan their next move. They found shelter in a small, abandoned cave, its entrance concealed by a curtain of tangled vines. They gathered driftwood for fire, hunted small game for food, and collected rainwater for drinking. They lived a simple, austere existence, their days filled with the challenges of survival, their nights filled with the comfort of each other's presence. As Sir Geoffrey regained his strength, they began to make plans. They knew that they could not remain on the island indefinitely. They had to return to the mainland, to confront their enemies, to reclaim what they had lost. "We need allies," Sir Geoffrey said, his voice thoughtful. "We cannot fight this alone. We need to find those who are loyal to Moray, those who oppose Elric and his allies." Beatrice nodded.
"There are some," she said.
"Lords who distrusted Alaric, who resented his ambition, who may be willing to help us." They spent hours discussing their options, weighing the risks and the potential rewards of each course of action. They knew that returning to the mainland would be dangerous, that they would be hunted, that they would face betrayal and opposition at every turn. But they also knew that they had no choice. They had to fight. For their love, for their people, for their home. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, Beatrice noticed a small, intricately carved wooden chest tucked away in a corner of the cave. She had seen it before, but she had not paid it much attention. "What is this?" she asked, her voice curious. Sir Geoffrey looked at the chest, his expression surprised. "I do not know," he said. "I have never seen it before." They opened the chest, their hands trembling with anticipation. Inside, they found a collection of scrolls, maps, and letters. They were old, yellowed with age, their ink faded but still legible. As they examined the documents, they realized, with a growing sense of excitement, what they had found. They were records of Moray, dating back centuries, detailing the history of the fortress, the lineage of its lords, the alliances and rivalries that had shaped the North. And then they found it, a letter, addressed to Sir Geoffrey's father, from a lord who had been thought to be a staunch ally of Blackmere. The letter revealed a conspiracy, a plot to overthrow the Lord of Moray and seize control of the fortress. The plot had been foiled, the conspirators punished, but the letter remained, a hidden testament to the treachery and ambition that had always simmered beneath the surface of northern politics. And among the names of the conspirators, Beatrice found a name that made her blood run cold. Lord Elric. He had been involved in the plot. Even then, a young man, eager to prove himself, willing to betray and murder to gain power. The discovery changed everything. It gave them a weapon, a tool to use against their enemies. It gave them proof of Elric's treachery, evidence that could be used to sway other lords to their side. "This changes everything," Sir Geoffrey said, his voice filled with a renewed sense of hope. "This is our chance. To expose Elric. To rally support. To reclaim Moray." They left the island, their small boat sailing towards the mainland, their hearts filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination. They knew that they were facing a formidable enemy, a man who was ruthless, cunning, and powerful. But they also knew that they had truth on their side, that they had love on their side, that they had the spirit of Moray in their hearts. The winter's reckoning was approaching. The final confrontation, the ultimate test of their strength, their courage, their love. The huntress and the wolf, armed with the secrets of the past, were ready to face their destiny, to fight for their future, to reclaim their home. The cold winds of the approaching season seemed to carry a whisper of hope, a promise of victory, a testament to the enduring power of love and loyalty in the face of betrayal and loss. The game was afoot, and the players were ready. Chapter 20. Dawn of a New Era. Their return to the mainland was marked by stealth and secrecy. Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey, disguised as peasants, moved through the war-torn landscape, gathering information, contacting potential allies, spreading the word of Lord Elric's treachery. They found a north divided, its lords wary and distrustful, their loyalties fractured by years of conflict and shifting alliances. Many were reluctant to commit to either side, fearing the consequences of choosing the wrong path. But Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey, armed with the evidence from the hidden chest, slowly began to turn the tide. They revealed Elric's past betrayal, his involvement in the plot against Sir Geoffrey's father, his ruthless ambition and disregard for honor. They spoke of Moray, of its strength, its resilience, its importance as a bulwark against the chaos and violence that threatened to engulf the North. They spoke of Sir Geoffrey's leadership, his unwavering commitment to his people, his willingness to fight for what was right. And they spoke of Beatrice, the huntress of Moray, the woman who had defied her brother, who had led the ambush, who had risked everything for love and loyalty. Their words, coupled with the evidence they presented, began to sway some of the lords. Old loyalties were rekindled, new alliances were forged, a coalition of support began to coalesce around them. The final confrontation took place at a gathering of northern lords, convened to discuss the future of the region, to decide who would rule, who would lead. Elric was present, confident and arrogant, surrounded by his allies, his power seemingly unassailable. He spoke of his strength, his resources, his right to rule by conquest. Then, Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey stepped forward, their disguises discarded, their presence electrifying the assembly. They presented their evidence, revealing Elric's treachery, his past crimes, his unsuitability to lead. The lords were stunned, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning realization. Elric, his face contorted with rage, denied the accusations, claiming the documents were forgeries, the accusations lies. But the evidence was too compelling, the testimony of Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey too convincing. The tide turned, swiftly and decisively. The lords, one by one, renounced their support for Elric, declaring their allegiance to Sir Geoffrey and Beatrice. Elric, isolated and defeated, was taken prisoner. His allies, seeing their cause lost, surrendered. The war was over. The winter's reckoning had come, and justice had prevailed. Sir Geoffrey and Beatrice, hailed as heroes, returned to the ruins of Moray. They stood on the battlements, overlooking the snow-covered landscape, their hands clasped, their hearts filled with a mixture of grief and hope. "We will rebuild," Sir Geoffrey said, his voice filled with emotion. "Moray will rise again, stronger than before." Beatrice nodded, her eyes shining with tears. "We will do it together," she replied. "We will create a new era of peace, of justice, of love." They began the long, arduous task of rebuilding, not just the fortress, but the lives of the people who had suffered through the war. They gathered the survivors, offered them shelter, food, and protection. They forged new alliances, strengthened old bonds, healed the wounds of the past. And in the spring, amidst the ruins of the old, a new Moray began to emerge. Stone by stone, wall by wall, the fortress rose again, a symbol of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of hope and love. Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey, their love forged in flames, tempered by adversity, stood side by side, ruling Moray with wisdom, compassion, and unwavering commitment to their people. The dawn of a new era had arrived, an era of peace, prosperity, and justice, an era built on the foundations of love, loyalty, and the courage of a huntress and a wolf who had dared to defy fate and forge their own destiny. The snow melted, the flowers bloomed, and life returned to the land, a vibrant testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Epilogue. Years passed, and Moray flourished. The scars of war faded, replaced by the vibrant tapestry of a thriving community. Children played in the courtyard where blood had once been spilled, their laughter echoing through the halls that had once known only silence and fear. The fields, once barren and ravaged, yielded bountiful harvests, feeding the people and fueling the prosperity of the land. Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey ruled wisely and justly, their names whispered in reverence throughout the north. They were known not only for their strength and courage, but also for their compassion and their unwavering commitment to their people. Their love, forged in the crucible of conflict, deepened with each passing year. They were inseparable, their bond unbreakable, their devotion to each other a beacon of hope and inspiration to all who knew them. They had children, sons and daughters who inherited their parents' strength, their intelligence, their unwavering sense of justice. The lineage of Moray continued, stronger and more resilient than ever before. One crisp autumn evening, Beatrice and Sir Geoffrey, their hair now streaked with silver, stood on the battlements of Moray, overlooking the landscape bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. They were older, their bodies bearing the marks of time and hardship, but their eyes still shone with the same love, the same passion, the same unwavering commitment to each other. "We did it," Sir Geoffrey said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "We rebuilt Moray. We created a better world." Beatrice nodded, her hand resting on his arm, her fingers interlacing with his. "We did it together," she replied, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "We faced the darkness, and we found the light." They looked out at the landscape, at the thriving villages, the bustling towns, the peaceful countryside. They saw the fruits of their labor, the legacy of their love, the testament to their enduring spirit. "I remember the day I arrived," Beatrice said, her voice reminiscent. "Lost in the storm, seeking shelter. I never imagined that I would find my home, my love, my destiny." Sir Geoffrey smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And I never imagined that the woman who stood at my gate that night would steal my heart and change my life forever." They kissed, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of a lifetime of shared love, of shared pain, of shared triumph. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that promised an eternity together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, they turned and walked back into the fortress, their arms around each other, their steps slow but steady. They were the Winter Lord and the Huntress, the rulers of Moray, the protectors of their people, the embodiment of love and loyalty. Their story, a legend whispered throughout the North, would be told and retold for generations to come. A story of courage, of resilience, of the enduring power of the human spirit. A story of a love forged in flames, a love that conquered all, a love that would last forever. The echoes of their lives, their choices, their triumphs, would resonate through the halls of Moray, a timeless testament to the dawn of a new era, an era born of sacrifice, of courage, and of the unwavering bond between a man and a woman who dared to defy fate and forge their own destiny. And as the stars emerged, blanketing the sky with their brilliance, Moray stood strong, a beacon of hope and a testament to enduring love.